On average, from the 60s and 70s to today, college tuition has gone up 1,200%. I view these four-year institutions as the Blockbuster video of education, the DMV of college, where you go in there and you're in these long lines like, what is happening? And it takes so much longer and it's so much more expensive than you think it should be. Like, we have streaming services now. We don't need Blockbuster. We have the internet. We don't need these four-year colleges. If you really want to go, you pay for it, but there should be a fully online, fully funded way to do that yourself for free.
Right.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Imagine Two People podcast, a place where we share ideas and discuss a better way forward. I'm Josh.
I'm Anna.
Today we're talking about colleges. Colleges in the US, specifically why in the world they're so expensive.
So expensive.
How did we get here? You know, and is it the same way around the world, or is it just the US?
No, the US is more, I think education is now expensive everywhere that, is private, but the US is notoriously expensive.
It's not as bad in Brazil?
No, colleges don't cost, unless you want to be a doctor, like medicine. Studying medicine in Brazil is really expensive. Now it's almost not worth it become a doctor. Yeah, but also we don't have the best universities in the world, and I think that factors in. The names of Ivy League schools.
Harvard, Stanford.
Yeah, you can recognize those names anywhere in the world. And if I say like my university name, like nobody knows what that is or where that is.
Well, a lot of people are starting to say that college is a ripoff here in the US now for a lot of degrees. I'm starting to hear that, like on TikTok and things. People are like, college is a scam, and here's why. And
right. Well, because it's so expensive, you need to justify that you're paying that much,
right.
And to get into that much debt at 18, getting out at 22 and figuring out that your degree didn't actually offer you potential to earn that much to pay it back comfortably. And now the housing is more expensive, cars are more expensive, just living is more expensive.
Everything.
Then you have to say, like, is this worth it? Like, how much average people own in debt in college here?
I think the U.S. college debt is around $1.8 trillion
Okay.
with a T. So it's a stupid amount of money. The average student leaving college, I think, has around $30,000 of debt, plus or minus two.
Yeah, that's so much money.
It's a huge, like you said, at the time when everything's more expensive, housing is more expensive, food and energy is more expensive. And so it's like, well, welcome to the world. Now you have $30,000 of debt to pay back,
right.
And you just got your first job, hopefully.
Yeah.
Just got your first job. It has ballooned so much past the rate of inflation that it really made me wonder, well, how the heck did we get here in the first place? It started with a conversation I had with my dad because we went to the same college. We got the same degree. And I paid astronomically more than him. It was like, because I was out of state, it was more like $40,000 a year. And if it was in state, it would have been $20,000. He was in state tuition back in 1970, in 1970s, mid 70s, and he spent about $1,000 per year. And he was able to work as a busboy while he was doing that and pay it while he was doing it.
That's crazy.
But imagine doing that today. Like, do you think I could have worked as a busboy and come up with 40 grand a year? Like, no, it wouldn't happen.
Yeah, even with adjustment, that's a lot more than
what
it should be.
On average, from the 60s and 70s to today, college tuition has gone up 1,200%. So that's 5 times the rate of inflation. So if you look this up, if you go on YouTube or your favorite podcast, you usually hear one of a couple different things, but it's mostly just one argument.
Yeah.
And this is what bothers me, is that's not that the argument is wrong, but people tend to focus on their favorite thing and not the full breadth of contributing factors to how something got the way that it did.
Right.
It was the same discussion with healthcare.
Right.
There was a lot of things that have contributed to why healthcare is so expensive. But people like to focus on their favorite lever and say, this is the only reason, and so we need to fix this one lever,
right,
without looking at the other levers. One of the key reasons that college has gotten more expensive is just the astronomically high demand. There's just, everyone's going to college these days. I think it's roughly 60%, 65% of people graduating high school are going to college, which is more than it was in the 70s, maybe more like 50 or 40%. But also the population has grown. Also, I was looking at Pew Research statistics showing that there's more women now that are going to college than men. I think it's 46% of women over the age of 25 have a degree versus 36, 37% of men. And before, there were twice as many men that were in college as women. So it's really shifted where it's not just the amount of people, but the types of people going. Every single minority group, whether it's Hispanic, Asian, or Black, they all go in much higher numbers to college now.
And the international students.
And the international students. So I think in the 60s and 70s, there was roughly 100,000, 200,000 international students. Now there's a million. So that's 1,000% increase. On the supply side, the amount of universities in the 60s and 70s was around 2,000. And today it's more like 4,000. So the universities have doubled. All of these different numbers contribute to higher prices because if you have more people coming to the same colleges, you're going to get a higher price.
Right.
But how much higher, right? It's hard to quantify exactly how much a 1,000% increase in international students contributed to tuition prices at the school you want to go to.
It's also worth saying that names matter. So even if we have double the amount of universities, not all of them have the same name recognition.
Right.
And if you look at the universities that were popular 50 years ago, they're pretty much the same.
For sure. I know for tuition at Harvard, I think it's between 60 and 80,000.
It's ridiculous.
It's so much money. I'm thinking 4 years at Harvard, how do you pay that back? But I guess you're more valuable to a company and hopefully you get a high-paying salary, etc. But anyway, so we talked about the
demand.
We talked about the supply. Something very few people I've heard talk about is the amount of administrators that are hired now at the institutions.
Right.
The same colleges that were around when our parents and grandparents were going to school had less administrators than they do now. And so these administration staff, they're doing HR, they're doing mental health services that are mandated, and they're doing DEI programs for faculty and staff. They're things that weren't really around and weren't really a thing when parents and grandparents were going to college. But now they're available on every public campus and every private campus here in the US today. So all of that requires hiring new people, usually higher paid admin salaries. And then that cost then gets transferred to the student.
Right.
So you have to ask how much this administrative staff offers in value to the average student going to college today. And is it worth putting all that cost onto the student? 400% more administration staff, it's going to be more support for the student in various ways, but are the quality of degrees and is the quality of education really that much better? And it's not just colleges, it's also elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools.
Right.
They all have this, I guess they call it administrative bloat, right? You have so many more administrators than you do now.
Yeah.
And it's so much higher than the amount of faculty that they've hired and the amount of professors and tenured teachers and things like that. But students don't have a choice. If that's the regulation in universities in the US, they have to pay for that whether they like it or not, whether you're using these DEI programs, whether you're using the mental health services on campuses, you're going to have to pay for it.
So we have an increase of demand on both nationally and internationally. We have a supply of universities that might not reach the demand in terms of growth. And we also have a crazy increase in staff that is being paid, so that cost is being transferred to students. All of those are factors. What else do we have?
Another significant contributing factor is that states had pulled their funding over the past 60 years from higher education. So, for example, back in the 60s and the 70s, the states would give state tax dollars, which were primarily from sales tax and property tax. They would take that money and they would fund public universities in that state for in-state students, which was about 75% of these colleges' budgets, more or less. Today, it's about half that. Today, it's about 35%. We could go into the history on how that happened and when it happened and what administration, but the result was states had basically cut their funding in half for a lot of these public colleges. If they're shifting the cost that they lost in state funding onto the students that go to that college, it would roughly double the cost of the education. But what we see in reality is that the cost was more like 5 times what it was back then, past the point of inflation. So where was the other 4x coming from?
It explains a little bit, but not everything.
Yeah, and this is the biggest issue I've had with a lot of the research that I've seen already done. If you were to look up why is college so expensive in the U.S. and you check out the top 5 videos, they all talk about the state funding hypothesis, that states pulled their funding, and so now college is 5x. I'm like, no, if state pulled their funding, it would be 2x, but where's the other 4x? And so that's it goes back to the conversation we had where people like to focus on one thing, one true thing with real data, but then you ignore a plethora of other contributing factors.
Right.
Another contributing factor to the high tuition prices is back in 1965, back when it was still cheap relatively to go to college, Lyndon Johnson released the Higher Education Act. It was part of a package deal with his Great Society initiative, but essentially it was the very first time in history, in U.S. history, where the government decided that at the federal level they would guarantee and back any private loan for college education, which meant if you wanted to go for whatever degree to any college, the government would give you a very favorable loan that you really didn't have to pay back until after you graduated, which was huge. Because before, you had to go to a private bank and you had to convince them to give you a loan. So that was based on your creditworthiness. It was based on whether or not the bank thought that degree would be likely to be able to pay back the loan. So they were only giving loans for a lot of STEM degrees and degrees that they thought had a high likelihood of being marketable for companies.
Yes.
Not a whole lot of art degrees probably for things like that.
Yeah, you're going to study philosophy and they give you $200,000.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
But that all changed in 65. So people now could go for any reason to any college and for any degree, and they could go and get a very favorable termed federally backed loan. That definitely increased the amount of demand of these universities, and it decreased the amount of students that were going. It didn't happen right away, but over the next 10, 20 years, you started seeing these shifts in the graphs on college tuition getting more and more and more expensive. And then in I think in the 80s, you had this Secretary of Education, William Bennett. He hypothesized that the student loans that were started in 1965 slowly were creating a domino effect, allowing colleges to say, well, hey, we might not have to control our costs as much as we had to, because if the government is backing these loans, these students are going to get a degree here regardless of what it costs.
Yes.
So to the student's perspective, there isn't that much of a difference between a degree that's $20,000 or $25,000 or $30,000. You're still going to get the degree if you want that one from that college. And so they had less pressure to cost cut and less pressure to manage their costs.
And a lot more incentive to raise prices.
Right. At that point, you could essentially start competing with every other college in the country and say, well, we have the best computer labs or we have the best stadium. And then you could take out a massive loan, build a giant stadium, and then just raise the price of your tuition $5,000. And so I think that's one of the biggest reasons that colleges are so expensive today. And it didn't happen right away. It happened over decades.
Right. And a lot of people don't realize, but every time the government offers a solution like subsidizing anything, it will move the needle on other factors in the market too. You can't move demand and not move the offer. So it happens when you increase minimum wage. Increase minimum wage, the price of everything is going to go up. If you give people loans to find affordable housing, then the prices of rent is going to go up because people have the incentives of raising the prices for one reason or another. Either you have like more cost, for instance, with minimum wages that will happen. Like, if you make $9 an hour and then suddenly they have to pay you $12 an hour, then if you work at McDonald's, like the prices for everybody that buys things at McDonald's is going to go up. And the prices of things that usually those people consume will also go up because every company knows now they can afford it because it's more money. So it's not necessarily helping. It's just moving. Every time that the government artificially moves a needle, there's another one somewhere else moving too. So they can't just say, oh, you need money for anything, we'll give it to you. That will incentivize companies, and in this case universities, to move their side as well. So that is huge in terms of what it means to how much the education cost.
Oh yeah, I mean, we've seen this happen in housing with federal loans with Fannie Mac and Freddie Mae, where that increased a lot of the housing costs. That was a major contributor to the 2008 housing bubble. We've seen it in agricultural farm subsidies. We've seen it in electric vehicle tax credits that as soon as the federal government said $7,500 we'll just give you off your federal tax bill for buying an EV, then the price of EV suddenly went up, right? And then when that expires, some of the prices come down because people can't sell them as much. And so they float around to what people can afford.
Yeah.
And if you're getting money from the government to pay for something, they'll float it up to whatever you can. That's the profit motive.
Yeah, and I think that it's important if you're a student or if you're thinking about getting a degree, or if you're going to pay for your kids' degrees and you're listening to this, we're not all talking about what is right or wrong. You know, like the government did a good thing or a bad thing. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about all the factors that you need to consider. Because one of the things is that the funding of the government funding anything and making things more expensive, not only is making things more expensive, but you have to think that with the housing market, for instance, people were buying houses that they could not afford. And if they were more honest market prices and not be approved for those loans, they wouldn't put themselves in the situation later to have to sell it and not be able to. So now they are bankrupt completely. They have a terrible time for years, decades to come, trying to pay that price that they shouldn't even have gotten involved anyway, because they thought that was easy money. Like, easy money doesn't exist. Free stuff doesn't exist. Nothing comes for free. Whatever it is that the government is funding is going to cost you something too, and it might skew you from making a good decision. You might get a loan that is too big for you to afford, but not only that, but it's not worth the degree that you're paying for. And you can say like, oh, I love studying this. Like, yes, but can you make the money to pay that back?
Right.
And if you have like, banks or a lender that is more honest with you, you might think like, well, I might learn this on YouTube and go, get a degree in something else that will actually pay for my other thing that is not going to pay that much. And then you may make a more accurate decision for your future that way, because you're not going to be 18 forever. And that debt is going to go with you forever.
Right. So those are some of the reasons that college got so freaking expensive over the past 60 years. And it's up to you really to decide which one of those contributing factors was the most significant, which maybe weren't so significant. I have my own opinions, but people can disagree on how we got here, but I care way more about where we go forward and what the solutions could be. There's a couple low-hanging fruit ideas that I think you could do right off the bat, and it's to get rid of a lot of these electives that are mandatory in some of these degrees, mainly technical degrees. I don't think it makes sense to me that if you're a math major or if you're a mechanical engineer to take an art class in college, take all these art electives and humanity electives. That's dumb to me. That's really stupid. You could take a 4-year degree and you could press that down into 3 or 2.5, and then they have to pay less money, and then the whole society can benefit from their expertise in the workplace quicker. And so I think it's a win-win. It's a win for the student. It's a win for society. It's only a negative for these colleges, essentially, is the way that I view it. They're going to have to cut a lot of these programs down that were probably inflated with the wrong incentives in the first place.
Right.
And in addition to that, I think you could definitely pare back on the 400% increase in bureaucratic administrative staff that we've had. Do we really need 400% more admins when the amount of teachers has been pretty consistent over the past 60 years? I think in the 60s and 70s, there was a 20-to-1 student to teacher ratio, and now it's more like 16-to-1. So they have hired more professors per student. But the amount of administrative bloat has increased, though, by 400%.
Yeah, that's insane. And a lot of things are automated now.
If anything, you should have less, right? But you have so much more, and I think you should cut that. It's probably a lot of it is regulation based on getting accredited and holding your accreditation and your certifications, and I think that should be completely revamped. The third idea that I had is the most controversial. It's really out there, but I firmly stand behind it, and I'm ready to put it out to allow people to completely eviscerate it, and it needs to be in order to actually stand on its own merits. But it's to simply put, take a very small sliver of the current budget that is given to the Department of Education and to higher education, which is roughly $80 billion in the budget of 2023. I forget what it was in 2024. It's probably somewhere around that, $80 billion. And you maybe take 5 of that, you put that into a fully funded, fully online, fully accredited online institution. And so you're able to get a free degree in any available degree, whether you want to study medicine or law or engineering or art. You can get an ABET accredited or regionally accredited degree for free online from the comfort of your own home with some of the best teachers in the entire world. I think if you ran this right with a good board of education and you were able to get the best staff, the best teachers, the best professors who are the best at what they do.
Standardized testing.
And you pay them salaries of $1 million a year, something they wouldn't be able to get at any other university, but they can get at this university. And so you can attract the best teachers in the world and you keep the best staff. And so not only are they contributing to a free education program, but they're making bank while they're doing it. And you could do it for a fraction of what we're currently spending, subsidizing these bloated institutions, like these bloated 4-year degrees.
Right. And even for some of these degrees would be harder to apply that, like if you're studying medicine or like you want to be a surgeon, like how do you do that online?
For sure.
Still, it would be the majority of the majors would benefit from this immediately.
Absolutely. Like in my degree for industrial engineering, 95% of it you could do online. There probably 98%. There were a few labs where you're working on machines in person and things like that. You could have a supplement where there's things that are in person, but most of it is online. And you could still do it for a very small fraction of what you're using right now with federal tax dollars from you and me and our neighbors.
You know what a possible solution for that is? The states could pay universities to use their labs for like 1 day of the week.
Ooh, I like it.
And
use existing infrastructure.
And pay the university more than they would make for their students to go to
They're
that
a business.
lab.
I don't know why they wouldn't do that.
Yeah, it's a possible solution for that problem.
That's the thing. When I look back at my 5 years, it ended up being 5 years. I was definitely delayed.
You got there.
I got there in college. I definitely paid more than I thought I should have. And if it wasn't for meeting the people that I met and being inspired to start my channel and then through the channel meeting you, I would have said I overpaid. You know, so I'm glad I did it in person. But other than that, other than those things, which are very important to me, I would have said it was an overpriced degree and I could have learned a lot of those same technical concepts online for a whole lot less. It isn't obvious to me why there's any reason, any compelling reason that if someone wants to spend that extra money, they should be forcing the government to spend that for them, which is just making your neighbor pay you to have your 4-year in-college experience. Which I don't believe is a cultural necessity. I don't think it's a necessity for your development. I don't believe it's a necessity for education. I know that we've created this culture of, oh, you got to go to college and have this college experience. I think it's kind of dumb, right? You look back on it later and you're like, yeah, it was unnecessary. You
can still go, but you have to privately pay for it.
Yeah, if you want to still have that in-college experience, you got to pay for it. But only if you had this free option on the side. You had this free, good quality education, accredited, any federal or private job will accept it, online institution that you can take from the privacy of your own home and the comfort of your own home at your own pace. I mean, that it seems like a no-brainer to me because in that sense, you're taking 80 billion, you maybe only use 5 of it, and the rest you could give back to the people because you probably shouldn't have taxed them for that anyway. And that would be roughly $400 per family every year that you would just give back to them in unused taxes.
I mean, I'm sold.
I would love to do that. And I know it's not going to be as simple as that because if the government offers a solution, it's going to be overly bureaucratic. But I believe there's a partnership that could happen with private industry, like you've mentioned, with these colleges, and you could make this work. But with the internet, there's no reason we shouldn't have an online, fully funded, available degree for anyone that wants it. I view these 4-year institutions as the Blockbuster Video of education, the DMV of college, where you go in there and you're in these long lines like, what is happening? And it takes so much longer and it's so much more expensive than you think it should be. Like we have streaming services now. We don't need Blockbuster. We have the internet. We don't need these 4-year colleges. If you really want to go, you pay for it, but there should be a fully online, fully funded way to do that yourself for free. Anyway, so that's my opinion. Let me know in the comments below if you disagree, and if so, why, and if there's anything I missed and why. And I would love to learn more about this. But I enjoyed talking about this.
Me too. We learned a bunch. I always learn a bunch.
Always. But until then, we'll see you guys in the next podcast. Take it easy.
Bye.
Bye.